But we'll go ahead and get started. Again, we have Miss Frankie Snyder coming to us from Jerusalem, and she is going to, the topic of our conversation today is the little things that count. And our talk today is in reference to the exhibit that we have here at the museum, Joshua, Judges, and Jesus, that we're in partnership with the Mid-Atlantic Christian University. So Ms. Snyder, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to do that now and share the screen with you, and then go to I want to go to the full screen. It'll do it in a second. Slideshow. Give it a second. Okay, there it is. Right, I've entitled this, The Little Things That Count, Small Finds from Khirbet el-Maqatir. Khirbet means the ruins. So this is the ruins of some town that was at one time called Maqatir, or the area that was called Maqatir. Historically, we still have not figured out what the name of this village is, or this town. When we read in the New Testament, there's something about a city called Ephraim, or some people say Ephraim, that was up in this area, and it might be that town, but we still don't know what the original name of this town is. Now, the area of the town basically is this whole area on the hillside, okay? And I'm going to show you a map in the middle to show you in relation to other places. So you see a road going down here through an Arab village, and then there's a main highway that's just over on this side. Now, where is this town? Maqatir is way up here, north of Jerusalem. It's about 12 miles north. The places that you're going to know the names of, you know Jerusalem, you know Bethlehem, you know Jericho. It's over this way. And Beit El, or Bethel, is right up here. So this is a little town that's right in this area. I volunteered with the Associates for Biblical Research. They're the group that's been excavating here for many years, and I volunteered with them there from 2009 through 2016. So some of these things I actually found, and other things I was there when they found them. But we're going to take a look at the different little things that they found. On the screen here, I say it's about 15 kilometers or 9 miles north of Jerusalem, and you take Route 60 up. Now, if this were an ancient road, there was an ancient road that went up here, and it was called the Ridge Road, or the Ridge Highway. And basically, Highway 60 still follows along this Ridge Highway here. And there's Maqatir again. It is really close to this main north-south road, and it's also on a main east-west road that went from Joppa, or Jaffa, which was a port city, cuts across Israel up through the mountains, past Bethel, and then goes on over to what is now Amman, Jordan. So it was very close to the intersection of two main highways from that time. Now, the different excavations that are carried on here. From the mid to the late 1800s, you had people like Edward Robinson and Condor and Kitchener, who, when they went through this area, found a Byzantine church. Now, the Byzantine period here is one of the Christian periods. It's from the mid-300s to the mid-600s. They found a Byzantine church that was sitting at the top of the hill, and then they also found ruins that were Hellenistic or Roman ruins that were slightly downhill from the church, but they didn't actually excavate it. They were doing something that's called a survey. Now, when you're doing a survey of an archaeological site or an archaeological area, you don't dig, you just walk around and you look. You look on the ground and see, what do you see? What can you pick up from right off the surface? Can you pick up pottery? Do you pick up coins? Do you see pieces of buildings still there? So there were different kind of surveys that went on in here. 1981, there was a big archaeological survey of this part of Benjamin, or the tribe land of Benjamin, which is north of Jerusalem. So there was a huge archaeological survey up there. And like I said, the people just go along. You string out a bunch of people across the field, and people just walk slowly. and you pick up what you can find on the surface, and you look for pieces of buildings, and you look for whatever you can see, but you don't actually dig, okay? And then in the 1980s and 1990s, there were more surveys that were done here under the University of Tel Aviv, under Israel Finkelstein and others. And finally, digging began there in 1995 to the year 2000. And then because of an intifada, which is like we're having right now over here, where you have this little war going on, because of that, they had to stop digging, and they didn't restart again until 2009, until 2016. And I worked with them each summer and each winter that they were here from 2009 to 2016. And it was under Associates for Biblical Research, and the top archaeologists were Bryant Wood and Scott Stripling. Now, this group is mostly Americans and Canadians who come over. And then there's people from all over the world who join us. Last year, we had people from Switzerland and people from the Netherlands and people from South Africa and somebody from Cameroon and people from Nigeria. We had a huge international group that was all working at these sites. Now, when you're trying to figure out when a building existed or when a town existed, you find different kind of things from different time periods. And they basically found 5 different times that people lived here, either on the ridgetop or down slightly on the hill. Something called the Middle Bronze Age. This is from 1500 to 1600 BCE or BC. They only found pottery from that time. From the Late Bronze Age, they found remnants of a fortress that was there. From the Iron Age, this is getting almost to the time of Solomon, not quite the time of David and Solomon. They found what's called squatter occupation, meaning they found little things that people were there, but it doesn't look like there was a whole village there. Maybe people were there hunting, and so you'd find little things that they left behind. And then we have what's considered late Hellenistic or early Roman, from 100 BC to 100 CE or AD. So that 200-year period. And there we found a small fortress and a whole settlement. Actually, the 100, that's kind of a rough number. Basically, we think the town was destroyed by the Romans in the year 69. It was north of Jerusalem, and as the Romans were coming from north to south, they destroyed cities north of Jerusalem in 68, in 69, and they hit Jerusalem and destroyed Jerusalem in 70. And we think this town was destroyed in the year 69. And then up on the top of the hill, there was a Byzantine settlement, meaning there was a church there and a monastery. And it seems to be from the mid-300s to the mid-500s. So these are the different time periods that we find. So it wasn't continual that people always lived there. There were people, and then there was nobody. And then there were hunters that came through, and then there was nobody. And then there were a few settlers, and then there was nobody. And then there was a town. And then there was nobody for almost 300 years. And then there was a Byzantine church and monastery that were there. Now, when I excavated, most of the time I excavated in the early Roman settlement. It's a little town. Like I said, we think it was destroyed in the year 69. And then the first couple of times I went out there, they were working up on top of the hill. So I worked in the church and in the monastery. So what I'm going to be talking to you about are small finds. Now, what do we mean by small finds? Basically, it's something that you can hold in your hand. It's things that would be left after 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years. What gets left? Wood deteriorates, so you don't get that. You know, if you look around, you know, I'm looking at my table right here. You know, in 1,000 years, what might people find from today? Well, they might find my keys. They're metal. Big pens. Hey, this plastic's going to be around here forever. Okay. Got a calculator here. Some of that might last after 1,000 years. You might find some of those things there. Will my mask be around? Right? Probably not. It's probably going to deteriorate. Might my eraser be around? No, probably not. That'll probably deteriorate. So we're looking at things that somehow manage to last. So they tend to be made out of metal, out of glass, out of stone. So we'll look through a whole bunch of different things. that were found that tell us about the people who lived around here. Basically, what do we classify as small finds? Like I said, usually something that'll fit in your hand, okay? Generally, it's not pottery vessels, although some pottery pieces may fit in your hand, but that's usually in a category all by itself, where we talk about the cups and the bowls and the pots that people ate out of, drank out of, they cooked their food in. That's a whole category by itself. We don't usually talk about architectural elements. Although little tiny mosaic cubes are only this big, they could be considered a small find, but they're usually put with architectural elements, meaning bricks and stones that the buildings were built out of. Also, very large stone vessels, large stone pots, although we'll see some larger vessels at the end of this, but usually large stone pots are not in it. So like I said, it's little things that would fit in your hand. They're things that people use every day that help them in their life. Now, how do we find these things? Well, when you're digging in the ground, you're using a trowel and you're just scraping away layers and layers and layers. But one way to find small things is to use a sifter. And here you see a sifter. It's got a screen with a wooden rectangular frame to it with a screen on it. We actually had some like this where one person can work it because it's got these legs that it stand on. You put a bucket of dirt in it and shake and shake and shake and shake and shake, and all the powdery dirt, you can see, falls down to the bottom, and then you're left on top with rocks and these little things. Sometimes it has two sets of handles, so you have a person on one side, a person on the other side. And we also sometimes use wet sifting. This is after the material has been shaken out, then you take a garden hose and you spray it all. And you find a lot of things, a lot more things by using wet sifting. However, at Maqatir, where it's located, we had no water whatsoever. There were no pipes nearby. There was no way to bring water in to do this. In order to do wet sifting, you have to be at a facility like the one on the right here. This is at the Temple Mount Sifting Project, where we set up a facility to use wet sifting, or in the project that Associated for Biblical Research has been using at Tel Shiloh. There, we're right beside some orchards and gardens that belong to a moshav, to a settlement that's right beside the dig. And so all we had to do there is run a pipe about 20 feet. No, it was maybe 20 yards or so. Run a pipe over from the irrigation system to our sifting, and now we can do wet sifting there. But at Maqatir, we only used the dry sifting to look for things. We did find 1,350 coins, all different kinds of coins. Coins are typically made of bronze. Rarely are they made from silver. You can find them occasionally, and only 1 in a million turns out to be gold. In this area, we didn't find any gold. Most of them were made out of bronze, although we did find a couple silver ones. Now, normally when you find a coin, it's not really nice and clean like this. See, on all these, you can read the writing, although that one's in Greek and this one is in ancient Hebrew. And so you have to be able to read the language to figure out what it's saying. But somebody can analyze it based on the pictures that are on here and the shape of it and what's written on it, and they can actually date all these coins. This is what uncleaned coins look like. Whenever I'm working with people, I tell them you're looking for something green, round, flat, and cruddy. They're green because they're made out of bronze, and it's sort of like the Statue of Liberty. You know how green it is? Well, it's really bronze, but the patina on it, that coloring that it gets on it, has made it green. So usually the coins look rather green. They're generally round. Some are not very round. Some are like this is not very round, but it's round enough. They're flat, and they tend to be really dirty. They are easier to see if you're doing wet sifting, but even with dry sifting, when it's still got dust and dirt on it, you can find them. A lot of our coins were found by Ellen. Ellen is our metal detectorist. We actually have a license from the Israel Antiquities Authority to be able to use a metal detector at the site in the middle of the dig. So lots of our coins were found by Ellen because she would go over all the dirt while people were digging, and then as people were sifting, she'd be checking the dirt, making sure that nobody missed a coin in there. So Ellen was usually our coin finder because she had the metal detector. Something really neat that we find are scarabs and bullae. Now, what is this? A scarab or a seal is something that you stamp with, and the bulla or the sealing is the wad of clay that you stamp on, okay? So this is one of our scarabs or our seals. Now, a scarab looks like a scarab beetle. It's a little Egyptian beetle. You can see the top of it is carved, so here's his head, here's a wing, and here's another wing. And when you flip it over, on the bottom of it, someone has carved in his symbol, his name, something to make it personally his. In ancient times, you didn't have an envelope to put a letter in. So you'd take your letter, you'd roll it up, you'd tie strings around it, and on the knot of the string, you'd put a wad of clay and you'd stamp it with your name seal. That way, when the letter got to whoever it was going to, they knew that nobody had opened it up along the way. So we did find 3 scarabs there at the site, but we didn't find any of these bullae or these wad of clay with seals on them. Now, we have found quite a few at Shiloh, and one of the reasons is that we are wet sifting, and you're much more likely to find these. If you wash all the dirt off of all the stuff, you'll find these a lot easier. Now, this is another type of seal. This was not found at Maqatir, but it's another type. It's called a cylinder seal. And it's got a picture carved on a little cylinder. And you can roll it along, like even on a pot, to make a decoration, but people used it for their name. Other ones look like this. It's kind of cone-shaped. And this one's got these little 2 4-legged animals that are on the bottom of it. This one's found at the Temple Mount Sifting Project. And the hole in here is for you to put a string through it to wear it around your neck. This particular one right here is King Hezekiah's seal. And it actually has his name on it there that says Hezekiahu. So this is the seal of King Hezekiah. This was found in a dig just south of the south wall of the Temple Mount, in the Ophel dig. And this one right here is one that was found in the Temple Mount. And it says Gaaliahu. The double line in the middle means son of Immer. And the Immer family was a family of priests or of Kohanim that served on the Temple Mount during the time of Jeremiah. So this one was from Maqatir, and these are other samples from other places. We found several Fibulae or toga pins. This is to hold your toga on. You know, you wrap it around you and you have to stick a pin on it over here. So here's the top of it. This one would have had one of these pins along the bottom to hold it together. Again, looks like a pin. And this one here really looks like a modern safety pin. In fact, Fibulae are the precursors of today's safety pin. Look at the way it's made. Here's the spring on it. Here's the loop that goes along with the hook that the pin is going to fit in, just like these, with the hook the pin fits in. And here's your pin. They haven't changed in 2,000 years. It's amazing when we see things like this. You know, need to hold your clothes on, so stick a safety pin on it. Well, theirs was a toga pin, or fibula is singular, fibulae is plural. It's a Latin word. And so what they were using, we haven't changed very much at all. Our technology is advanced, but not very far on safety pins. So like I said, these are the things that people were using, and we use almost the same things today. We did find a lot of beads and pendants, and this is just part of the collection. I'm the person that actually is publishing all of these. We have some of them made out of just generic stone, usually out of limestone. We have little round ones or long ones or circular ones. This one is a long bead that you can put between 2 strings of beads around your neck to keep them a certain distance apart. It's called a spacer bead. We have a lot of that are made out of carnelian, which is a red stone. It is found a lot in the country of Yemen, that's sort of near here. We find it in Egypt, but we do have some carnelian that's found here in Israel. And these 2 are banded agate. You've probably seen agates before. They've got these beautiful lines of coloring on them. Some are made out of glass. Now, these are a little bit later. This is probably from sometime in the last 400 years. This one here, it's made just like a game die. In fact, The 1 is opposite the 6, the 2 is opposite the 5, and the 3 is opposite the 4. So the opposite sides add up to 7. That's the way dice are made today, and that's the way this bead was made. And this bead has the hole running through it. It goes from the 1 spot through one of the 6 spots on the bottom of it. So there's a hole running right through the middle of here. So this person had a bead that was made just like a game die. We found a lot of things that are made out of seashells. Sometimes they're whole seashells like this with a natural hole that's worn in the end of it, or maybe it's been polished off to make a little hole there. Other pieces look like this. It's like pieces that were along the shore that had been tumbled around in the surf, and they were very smooth on the edges, and someone then just drilled holes into them. You see the hole drilled here and here. This one again has 2 holes in it to use as a spacer between 2 strings of beads along a necklace. And this thing here is called a cassid lip. It is the edge of a conch shell. You know how a conch shell has an edge and then the big hole in it? This is from the edge of the conch shell. Now this type of shell that has been filed down, very often, this one you can see there was a hole here and a hole here, so somebody could string it on a necklace. Sometimes they don't have holes in them. These seem to be associated with some sort of a religious rite, because they're found very often near where some kind of an altar was, or they're found in a burial site. And we don't really know what it is. It's very limited numbers that we find of these. Maybe they've found 20 in Israel, you know, in the whole time that, you know, all the different sites. We may have about 20 of them, not very many, but we did find one at Khirbet el-Maqatir, and we have found one at Shiloh. Other kinds of jewelry. We find things that are made out of bronze. So we find bronze rings. Now these rings here, if I can get it on my baby finger, I know that it is a man's ring. People then were smaller, and the rings were smaller. About as far as I can get a women's ring on my finger is on the very tip of it here. I can't even get it past my first knuckle. That's how small they are. And if I can actually take a ring and put it completely on my baby finger, then I realize that this was probably a man's ring. So these two are just simple ones. This one has some kind of a little glass ornament that's set in it here. This one, you can tell it had something that was set on. It's got this little hole on it. This was like a, what do you call it? A signet ring, you know, with an insignia on it. This is called the bezel of it right here, this one. We also find bronze and silver. So here's a silver earring. Let's go over here to these glass bracelets. These glass bracelets are ones probably, let's see, this one, this one, this one, and that one are probably from around the last 400 years. This one can be back from the Roman period. Here are some earrings. This one's made out of silver. This one was bronze, and this little guy here was bronze. He looks like a little horned creature. I'll show you a bigger picture of him. This is one made out of bronze, and a lady could put it through a hole in her ear, and then I guess the head would stick out this way, and the tail kind of wraps around behind. We did find, in Jerusalem, we found a gold one over at the City of David. So they're very similar in the way that they're made and the way they're shaped. They're both this kind of little horned dragon, horned animal of some kind. But of course, this one is a much classier one. It's made out of gold. I've actually seen this one. I didn't hold it in my hand, but I saw it in somebody's hand, you know, right up close. But we had one here that was made out of bronze that was very similar to it. So it's, you know, these decorative earrings. So ladies, they had pierced ears. Did the man have pierced ears too? Might have, don't know. Okay. We find lots of beauty products. First, we have cosmetic spatulas and applicators. We find little jugs that are only about the size of an eraser. Okay, they're little jugs like this, and they were for mixing up cosmetics. Mix up your mascara, and these are for applying the mascara. So you can take this and stir it in, and then use the end of it here to put on your makeup or your eyeshadow. And here is another little spatula or a makeup, her makeup. But these are really neat, the tweezers. Now this is a very simple tweezer that's just made out of wire that's been bent. But this one is really sophisticated tweezers. I mean, even for today, these are very sophisticated tweezers. What happens is as you pinch these together, you can take this little rectangular, slider right here, and slide it down to hold it close together. So if you want to hold on to something, you just take that slide, and as you pinch these two tongs together, it will slide down there and allow you to hold them right where you need them. There are medical implements also sometimes that you find, and you will find these tweezers along with medical implements, but sometimes along where it appears that it was a lady with her makeup, right? Different kinds of things. Now, for spinning and weaving, the main thing that we find are what's called spindle whorls. This W-H-O-R-L-S, a spindle whorl. They're about the size of a quarter, 25-cent piece. It's got a hole in the middle. They are usually rounded on the top, flat on the bottom, and they are put through a stick. It is then attached to your fluffy fiber, and you can spin it like a top because it's heavy, usually made out of stone, sometimes out of metal, sometimes out of clay, but not usually. Sometimes out of glass, but not usually. Usually there's stone because you want something that's heavy enough to spin like a top. Remember back at this time, if you needed a new coat or you needed a new pair of pants, you couldn't go to the store and buy it. In fact, you couldn't even go to the store and buy the fabric. Nor could you go to the store and buy the thread to make the fabric, to make the clothes. You had to start with the fiber itself. Two main kinds of fiber were used: wool from sheep or goat that would make, wool fabric. And then you have flax, which is a grain. You use the grain stalk, and that makes linen. So basically, clothes are made either out of wool or out of linen. They didn't have cotton in this area, so wool and linen is what we find around here. And in both of these, in order to spin the thread, you put the fibers up here on a stick, and then you take your spindle whorl, attach it to one of these sticks, you tie the beginning of your thread to the stick, then you spin it. You spin the whorl around, and it'll spin like a top, and it will spin your fibers into thread. And then you wrap that thread around the spindle right here until you get a whole bunch of thread, and then you can start weaving. Now, to do the weaving, you have to set up threads hung from a bar of some sort. Now you can see here, there's the fibers that someone was using to start spinning their thread. There's a spindle whorl. But to weave the thread, you would tie the threads across a bar at the top. They're weighted down by weights at the bottom. And then you can move a shuttle through here to help you weave your threads in and out, in and out, in and out, in order to form your fabric. And this is part of a bone weaving shuttle that we found. When you find them, they're almost the size of a big pen, not quite that big, maybe only about this big. That's sort of the size of these. But they're made out of bone that has been carved flat. One end is rounded and one end has a point on it. The point is that you can go in between the threads and then shove the threads back and forth in between the threads that are hanging down in order to weave your fabric. So before you can make the clothing, you have to make the fabric. Before you make the fabric, you have to make the thread. So it was, very labor intensive, and it was a women's job then, and women spent a lot of time weaving, spinning, and making clothing. In the category of weapons, we have arrowheads. Usually they're made out of bronze. Sometimes later on they're made out of iron, but at this time, the earlier times there at Maqatir, they're made out of bronze. We did find this really nice axe handle, And we had a lot of sling stones. Now, I happen to actually have a sling stone. Here is a sling stone. This was left over at a dig that I went to, and for some reason, the archaeologist didn't want it, and he threw it in the trash and said, "Don't you want that?" And he goes, "No, I don't want it. We've got enough of them." I said, "Okay, I'll take it." So I took it, and I'm getting ready to take this to my grandson. I'm going to give him a sling stone. Now, when you're shooting a sling stone, the sling is not the Y-shaped thing like this that you pull the string back on that you think of. That's not what a sling looked like. I'll pick up my little mask here. It was much more like a mask. You would put your stone into the sling. You would take it and fling it around your head, right, to get it going really fast. Then you let go of one side of it, and the rock will go flying off. So when you see anything about slings and sling stones, or David and Goliath, with David with the slingshot, it's not the Y-shaped slingshot like this. It's going to be something that looks more like your mask. It's going to be, a pocket that you put it into with strings on the side that you sling this way, and then the rock goes flying out. So we found a lot of sling stones. Industrial items, little things. We found iron rings. Here's a larger piece. It's almost the size of a bracelet or something, but it's not a bracelet because it's made out of iron. Usually the jewelry is made out of bronze. Here's a little pair of pliers. They're very neat with a little hinge right here in the middle. And this was from the Second Temple Buried Village. So it's like, wow, this is really neat and old. Iron nails. And this is the bone handle from an awl. You can see the stick part of the awl, and awl is what you use to chisel wood or to chisel stone. And this is the bone handle that was attached to it. So they look like the things that we use today. You've got our nails look very much like this. Our pliers look like this. It's amazing finding pliers from back there. And an awl today still has usually a wooden handle on it or a plastic handle rather than one made out of bone. We also find a lot of flint tools. The flint was used for cutting. It is a very, very hard stone, and flint is found in between chalk layers around the country. There's not a whole lot of places that have it. Right here in Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives actually is it's a chalk mountain with flint veins in it. So that's one place locally where we can get flint. They would take the flint and they would chip it down so that you have a cutting edge here and a cutting edge here. So some of them are triangular. When you look at them from the end, they'll be triangular with a point here and here. Other ones are more like a trapezoid. This one here is more like the trapezoiding. So it comes down here, here's the cutting edge, flat on the top, there's another cutting edge on that side. This one is more triangular. You see a side here, there's a cutting edge, there's a cutting edge. Very often the edges are made so they go chip, 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 chip. It's a serrated edge, so they cut beautifully. It's really a great knife. Even today, people who work with flint will make flint tools, and it's sharp enough to cut anything that you need to cut. Right? We find weights. Now, weights were used for commerce. If you wanted to buy something, if you wanted, the merchant might say, "Oh, that cost 1 shekel." Well, at the time, today a shekel is a coin. It used to be that a shekel was a weight. So it was a certain weight, and the merchant would say, "Oh, they cost 1 shekel." So we would take out his little weigh scale, and he'd put his 1 shekel weight on one side, and then you would put little chunks of silver or chunks of bronze on the other side until it balanced. And that would be the shekel worth of silver or the shekel worth of bronze that you would use to buy something. This is what they used before they had coins. When we talk about, when did coins come in? About 500 BC is when coins came in. About the time that the Jews came back from the Babylonian captivity, moved back to Israel again, that's about the time we start finding coins. Prior to that, we don't find coins. In the Bible, when it talks about Abraham bought the cave at Machpelah for 400 shekels of silver, it was not 400 shekel coins. They didn't have shekel coins. It meant 400 shekel weight that he bought it for. Now, later on, we find little metal weights. These are actually from the Byzantine period, so these were found up by the church. A little square flat one, and this is more like a little cone-shaped one that would be used in commerce. Now, if you wanted to buy like a half a pound of salt, so the merchant would take a half a pound weight, like this. He put it on one side, starts putting salt on the other till it balances, and there's your half a pound of salt. Now, these are ones, they're about the size of hockey pucks, so we just call them hockey pucks. Now, these are smaller ones, but all these guys here, about the size of a hockey puck, and they were used in commerce. But they were weighted, they were made so that they were a very specific weight. In fact, some of these you'll see like a little dimple in the top. That was because it weighed too much, okay? And they would have sample weights that you would balance your weight against. And if it weighed too much, then like this, they take a little dimple out of the top of it, to get it down to be exactly the proper weight, so that you weren't charging or weren't being charged too much because somebody was using a wrong weight. Sometimes we find little rolled metal tablets. Now, I don't know if they've analyzed this one yet to figure out if there's anything written on this one, but sometimes they would be incised with blessings or with curses on them. Other miscellaneous small things. Here's a bronze clasp. It almost looks like it would go on a diary, to close a diary. I have no idea what they use this one for. This is a stylus to write with. They would write on little clay tablets. It would be a smooth piece of, not clay, but wax tablets. You'd use the pointy end, right here, use the pointy end to write on, and then when you wanted to erase it, you'd use the flat end to smooth it back out again. And then you could write on your tablet again. So it's reusable paper, but it wasn't. It was a little, I think it was usually made out of wood that had the wax layer on it, so that you could write on it. They would do their calculations on it, whatever, and then erase and reuse it again. These are two little lead buttons. I have no idea what they're used for. We found them at Maqatir. We also found them on the Temple Mount. It's probably something decorative, and it may have been a decorative thing that was used on horse bridles. It may be from something like that. Here's an iron buckle. This kind of chain, we do know what these were for. These were used in the Byzantine churches to hang oil lamps from the ceiling, or to hang an incense holder from the ceiling. And this is a bronze straight pin that is bent. You have to imagine what it looks like when it's straight. And instead of having a ball at the end or a, something at a ball, like a ball or a head on it here, you can see it gets thicker. So this would go through the fabric, but then this, because it was thicker, would not go through. So you could use something like this if you wanted to hold your cloak closed. If you weren't using the safety pin type of fibula, you could use the straight pin to put it in, and it would also hold your cloak closed. Okay. We do have some larger objects. This stone vessel here is actually at your museum right now. It is a large basin. It's about this big, okay? This is a basin that could be used probably for holding your grain or for mixing up your dough to make your bread. Now, a lot of vessels, either bowls, cups, plates, things like this, were made out of stone. Why did they make them out of stone? It had to do with Jewish ritual purity laws. They knew that certain types of material could become ritually impure and they'd have to be thrown away. So like regular clay could become impure and wood could become impure. But they said that stone did not become impure. So they carved a lot of bowls, cups, plates, dishes, basins, things like this, water jugs, usually out of chalk. which is a rather soft stone. Now, when I talk about chalk, this is the same kind of chalk that you use on a chalkboard, but people don't use it anymore. You use markers, you know. Anyway, back to regular chalk for chalkboard. It's the same thing, but once you carve it, then it starts hardening up more. Some other smaller objects, and I know that this one's over at the museum right now. Here is a stone cup. Here is a stone stopper. I don't think that one's there. That's still over here in Jerusalem. And this is part of a stone pitcher. You can see it's got a little hole, I mean, a nozzle, what do you call it? A spout, I can't think of the word, a spout at the end of it here and the handle on it. But these are slightly larger. This usually is not in the category of small finds, but they put them in here because these are at the museum right now on exhibit, and want to explain to you what they are. And I know that this is not there, but this is actually a piece of a tabletop. And here's what the tables look like. They were usually rectangular. They had some kind of usually one leg down through the middle of it, sitting on a base. But this is a piece of a tabletop. It's about this thick. Sometimes they would have decorations out here along the edge of it. It is made from black bitumen. Bitumen is a stone that we find down near the Dead Sea. This is a much larger object, okay? It is not a small object at all, but I thought I'd show it to you because I had a picture of it. When we were digging at Maqatir, inside where every house was, there was always something under it. It might be a cistern to hold water. It might be a storage area. It might be a workshop. People would put things down into the ground because it was cooler down there. You realize in Israel, it is rather hot in the summertime. So in the winter, it was warmer down there. In the summer, it was cooler. And this is Suzanne down here, and this is Steve handing her something down there. This is Suzanne down in there. She was digging this whole thing out, cleared it all out. And what was very interesting, the bottom of this cistern was paved with tiny little mosaic stones. That's why I put it in here, because there are these tiny little mosaic stones. Like I said, they're usually not in the small finds category, but I threw it in here because it's fun. You'll notice that when you look down in through the hole, there's a depression right in the middle. That's so that when the water level is getting very low, it's still going to drain right to the very center. And when you drop your bucket right down in through the middle of the hole, you can still get water, even when there's not a whole lot of water left in there, because there's this little divot right down in the very center of it. So these are some of the things that we found there, and you can see they're the same kind of objects that we use today. Some of them haven't changed very much, some have, but they haven't changed that much, and it gives us an opportunity to understand how these people lived, what they had to do to get what they needed. You know, how did they get their clothes? Well, you couldn't go buy it. You had to shear the sheep. You had to collect the flax. You had to make the thread, to make the cloth, to make the clothing. You begin to understand what their life was like. And they had, in the end, they had products very similar to ours, but they had to do a lot more work to get to them. I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll have Lori pick up any kind of questions and answers, questions that people were sending along the way.
Sure. If someone has a question, you can either place the question in the chat or you can place it in the Q&A. So if someone would like to, if someone has a question, or maybe Ms. Snyder did an excellent job in her talk today in helping us understand everything. So Ms. Snyder, how about if you tell everyone how long you've been, how you started out as a volunteer and you were able to
launch a career.
Yes.
Yeah. When I came over here, I was in my late 50s. I've been here for 14 years now. I came over here not really knowing what I was going to do when I got here. I started volunteering at the Temple Mount Sifting Project, which was right here in town, right here in Jerusalem. And after 2 weeks, I got hired. It was like, wow, I wasn't really expecting to get a job here, and not that quickly. So I ended up working at the Sifting project. And one of the things that I got fascinated by were these geometric shaped tiles. They're triangles and squares. And hold on one second. I actually have some right behind me. I didn't think about this. Yes. These are some of these kind of tiles that I work with. Okay. These tiles are actually from Masada. Okay. These are Masada tiles. This one's made out of bitumen, which is this black rock that's from down by the Dead Sea. And this is local limestone. I started working with these geometric shaped tiles that were being found on the Temple Mount. And I asked one of the archaeologists one day, is anybody working with these trying to figure out what the original patterns were? And she said, no, right now, we're collecting them, cataloging them. Do you want to do something with them? I said, sure, I'm a mathematician. I like geometry. Here, let me do this. So I started, and it turned out that I am now the country specialist in these tiles. It's not because I was looking for it. It's just that as a mathematician, I could figure out things that other people couldn't. So I worked with the tiles from the Temple Mount, and then the Israel Museum was putting together an exhibit of King Herod's architecture, and they had all these kind of tiles from Herodium, which is the place where King Herod is buried. And they had a lot of these tiles, and they wanted somebody to make a floor with the tiles. So they asked me if I would do it because they found out I was working with these tiles and nobody else around the country was. So I made a floor for the museum. And then once everybody saw it in the museum, they knew that, hey, there's somebody who's doing this. So I started getting calls from all over the country. And within a year, I had been contacted by every one of King Herod's palaces. The archaeologists that work at each one of these palaces, and they asked me to come and work with their tiles. So I work with all these kinds of tiles for 8 different Herodian palaces, 8 of Herod's palaces, plus the ones from the Temple Mount. Also later on, the same kind of work was done in Byzantine churches and in Crusader churches. The floors look different. Maybe there are rectangles or squares or little L shapes, whatever they were, little kite-shaped tiles. The sizes and the shape changes, but they still have these really fancy designs made with geometric patterns on the floors. And so I work with Byzantine churches and Crusader churches, along with all of King Herod's sites. And that has become my specialty.
So it just goes to prove that if you go over to volunteer on the site, that you might end up over enjoying a career.
Right. Like you said, I wasn't expecting a career. I came over here, sort of to semi-retire. I wasn't planning on doing anything. And for the last 14 years now, it has become a career, even though, I am going to be leaving Israel very soon, probably within like the next 3 weeks or so. I'm going to be moving back to the United States. I'll be moving to Richmond, Virginia, which is not very far from you. So I'll be coming there, but I will still be working with all these different sites here. But at this point, I'm choosing to move back to the States and work from there. And I'll be back over here on digs and back over here, working on various projects, but I'll be operating out of the United States now instead of out of Jerusalem. Great.
Again, it looks like you did such an excellent job in explaining everything. And in fact, I found the talk very interesting. I learned a lot that we can share with the public when they come into the museum for Joshua, Judges, and Jesus. And hopefully Joshua, Judges, and Jesus will be up through November, or the closing date scheduled for November the 13th. So maybe we can get Ms. Snyder in, and hopefully you can visit us when you arrive back in the United States.
I would love to do that. Come down there. Yeah.
Yes, please.
What all is in your exhibit? I didn't see the whole list, or I saw part of the list or something. So there's different kinds of things that are there that I didn't show you. But we want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this and to talk about the things that you have at your museum right now.
Yes, and we did have a notice that this was so great. Thank you so much. for joining us. So we do have a comment. But again, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Ms. Snyder, for taking time out of your evening to join us today. And we just ask everyone, we'll have another History for Lunch in the month of June, which I believe is scheduled for June the 2nd. So look online for our June the 2nd History for Lunch. But again, we would like to thank Ms. Snyder today for joining us all the way from Jerusalem and giving us so much valuable information in reference to the exhibit we have with Mid-Atlantic Christian University. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you have a great day, and please be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.